Hello, forum attendees. This is Melanie Schlosser, just popping in to say hello. Since I couldn't be at this year's forum in Seattle in person, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank our opening keynote again. Heather is one of our community's main allies when it comes to thinking about the role that advocacy plays in the work that all of us do. And we definitely rely on Spark to lead the way in that direction. Um, Advocacy has been a bigger and bigger push for LPC over the last couple of years, and I'm so thrilled that Heather agreed to speak with us. Because yeah, like her perspective is invaluable when it comes to what are the best ways to tackle um, influencing and advocating for libraries in these challenging times. So that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Hello, everybody. I'm really honored to be here with you at the Library Publishing Forum to talk a little bit about open knowledge sharing in a chaotic time. And I want to start by first thanking Melanie and the wonderful forum organizing team for accommodating this hybrid presentation, and especially for creating the opportunity for us to have a live Q&A discussion at the end. I'm really looking forward to that. So let's dig in. Um, yeah, nice, cheerful slide to start with. It's really impossible to start any talk without acknowledging just how difficult a time this is for our community, for our libraries, our institutions, and our society writ large. We're all wrestling with the impact of just massive changes and the deep sense of uncertainty that's been permeating our ecosystem. And really, over the last 2 years, it's honestly been hard enough some days, feeling like we're in an atmosphere where things are being torn down. It's hard enough to try to put one foot in front of the other many days, let alone finding the wherewithal and the time to clear your mind and think strategically about the future. But of course, that's exactly what we have to do. And it's what I want to spend a little time talking with you about today. I want to talk about how we focus on continuing to build towards our strategic goals in times of unprecedented uncertainty, of chaos, really. What actions can we take today that will help us continue to build towards the vision of the research and knowledge sharing environment that we ultimately want to enable? How do we keep making progress towards ensuring that everyone everywhere can not only access, but also contribute to and benefit from sharing knowledge? So over the next 35, 40 minutes, I will dig in and talk about this in kind of three phases. First, I want to talk about what's going on, specifically the sweeping political, economic, and technological pressures that are affecting all of us. And then I want to look specifically at how these pressures are affecting our community, libraries as publishers, university-based publishers. And finally, I want to spend the bulk of the time exploring, so what can we do about it, right? Spark is a catalyst for action. And we always try to ensure that our advocacy is never simply about just calling out a problem or saying no to something. We always try to focus on, so what do we want to say yes to instead? And let me just say up front, a lot of the content of the first two sections might feel negative and overwhelming. And, truth told, there are a lot of really huge challenges facing our community right now. But please hang in with me. I honestly do believe there are ways for us not only to get through the craziness and chaos, but also to potentially make significant progress towards effecting large-scale, system-level changes that can contribute significantly to reshaping how knowledge is shared for the better. So let's start with what's going on, and we'll start with the political environment. The the wrecking ball motif in the first slide is, really does kind of signify how 2025, I think, felt to many of us in the research and the Scalcom community, and I think the U.S. writ large in a lot of ways. Um, uh, 2025 felt like there were so many structures that were being torn down. This past year in 2026, that pace has slowed a little bit, but we're still seeing sort of targeted systemic and systematic dismantling of key structures and norms that affect us on a day-to-day basis. This is manifesting in things that are really existential to federally funded research and science in particular. We're seeing funding cuts for basic research across the board, grant freezes, elimination of funding for, in some cases, entire research areas or agencies, really kind of discipline based. We're seeing large scale personnel cuts across our research agencies. Our human infrastructure has really been, pretty badly damaged on that front. Our library community knows better than almost anyone just how much our data has been at risk. From our perspective, we've seen selective removal of data and of information, again, with many cases, disciplinary areas being targeted, including areas that we care deeply about. We're also seeing the dismantling of critical research infrastructure, agency platforms that we rely on to facilitate the sharing of research and scholarship are being defunded or in many cases, because of the personnel cuts, are simply not staffed to be able to do the work that we have relied on. This is accompanied by like a really marked increase in the politicization of science and more recently of the grant making and funding process for research in general. From last year's executive order on gold standard science norms to the recent proposed complete overhaul of how the White House OMB is proposing to do grant making, we're seeing the steady elevation of political appointees over subject matter experts and scientists. This is really contributing to an atmosphere of uncertainty, constant uncertainty. Where is the terra firma under our feet in thinking about the research and scholarly communications enterprise? And unfortunately, I've been in DC for 44 years, and I've been working on policy and advocacy for the library community and Spark for 22. And I've never seen an atmosphere like this where we have folks in agencies and in the research positions in particular. It's hard enough to get people on a call, let alone to get them to come to meetings or to collaborate. It's a really, really unprecedented time here in DC. The political pressures are exacerbated by economic challenges as well. We've kind of got this trifecta of policy and politics, and economics and technological changes that are really bearing down on us. And as I noted just now, research funding has a huge amount of downward pressure on it. And it's not by accident, right? This is just not a priority for the current administration, and Congress is unfortunately not stepping up and making any changes in that regard. So we have, downward pressure on the amounts of money that's going into the research process, along with a steady drumbeat of increasing regulation on how the existing funding and the new funding might actually be spent. The OMB regulation, for example, that's proposed would significantly limit what direct grant funds can and, more importantly, can't be spent on in the grant making process. And while right now the attempts to cap indirect costs out of federal research funding that go to our institutions are not covered in this particular round of changes, OMB has signaled and actually signaled in this latest rulemaking process that the intent is to regulate downward indirect costs that our institutions can ultimately recover. These things, hit libraries really hard. This is happening at the same time many of our institutions experienced endowment tax changes in the last Congress, while inflation just hit 4%. And while we're also, from non-governmental sources, continuing to operate in an environment where we see upward pressure in costs from many of the publishers that we rely on to purchase content from, again, with consolidation, the recent purchase of Emerald, for example, by Wiley, giving us even fewer choices of cost-effective ways to get content. Those two things would be tough enough if we were just dealing with those pressures on our own. But of course, in the technology camp, we're seeing just an explosion of new generative AI and agentic technologies beyond anything we could have imagined, let alone planned for. The sheer pace of technological change has been accelerating beyond like anyone's wildest expectations. It's nutso cuckoo to me that we hear from tech company CEOs that they now consider 1 year to be long-term planning in the generative AI space. The quick pace, right? That accelerated speed means new AI tools, systems, things that we need to be aware of and to look at how they may affect our day-to-day lives are popping up, it feels like every week, and they're touching every aspect of library and publisher work. So these three things combined, you know, really create an operating environment like no other we've ever experienced before. Um, and of course, all sectors, all fields, right? Nobody's immune from this, right? Everybody is feeling this. But I want to just take a couple of short minutes to just look at specifically what does it mean for our community, for libraries as publishers in specific. Um, Obviously, it doesn't take, you know, a rocket scientist to look at the economic pressures and political pressures with the downward budget push and to understand that it means there's less money across the board. Cuts to basic research funding and all of the other attendant pressures mean less money for actual research, less money for our institutions, and of course, what we feel most acutely, less money for our library budgets. I don't know of any library in sort of the Spark arena that isn't wrestling with deep cuts into, in many areas, the core of the functions that we have, from collections to staffing to our services that we provide campuses. And absolutely open programs, Scalcom initiatives, including library budget, publishing programs, our nascent Diamond open access activities, even our repositories are even more under pressure with the budget cuts and the financial conditions on our campus. It's really interesting to that this is the same case for some publishers. The especially commercial publishers who depend on an APC model, because that model depends on volume of articles, less money for research is translating into less articles potentially being published. And while this may seem like a little bit of a zig or a zag or an indirect impact for libraries, I think it really has implications for us and particularly for libraries as publishers. And I'll unpack that a little bit more when I talk about positive actions that we can take. These pressures also mean that the fundamental role of libraries and of the library is being called into question even more sort of front and center than normal. Our institutions are being forced to retrench because of these pressures, these budget pressures, political pressures, tech pressures. And they, of course, look at each operating unit and ask, what does that unit do that's core to the institution? It's not new for libraries to have to do this. We've been challenged in the 22 years I've been at Spark continuously. Libraries have been challenged to evolve. But the pressure for us to transform, I think, is higher than ever. Those calls for libraries meeting the moment, transforming to meet the moment is deeper than I've ever seen. And it's the desired end state of that transformation is not it's not the same on every campus. It's deeply local, which means it's hard for libraries to kind of do our sort of normal collaborative, like, oh, what can we do collectively to kind of help us get through the things that we're facing on our campus when a lot of what's being asked of the library is very responsive to local conditions on the ground. And libraries, of course, are challenged by AI and tech much in the same way as most other entities, right? There's not an organization or a company alive who isn't wrestling with the appropriate uses of AI, with how AI might be used to enhance or replace functionality that we perform, tasks or services that we perform. But we are also wrestling with questions that have come up from tech that are very unique to libraries. For example, how do we view library collections in a world where content is now viewed as potential training data for AI? Do we continue to view our collections as knowledge that we have an obligation to share openly? Or do we start to view them more as potential assets, content assets that might be monetized in the AI space? The pressure to think about that kind of monetization is certainly exacerbated by the current economic situation. And in addition, as librarians, as publishers, as library publishers, and open advocates, we're hearing, a lot more frequently from researchers who are coming to us and saying, yeah, I thought I wanted to make my article available openly, but maybe I don't want it to be open for some greedy AI company to use. We're in this really interesting and critical period where the tension between openness and control is rapidly coming to a boiling point. Okay, so that's a lot, right? Those are a lot of pressures, a lot of things on our plate. What can we do about it? What are we in a position? What kind of actions are we in a position to take to drive things forward in a positive way? Um, One action that I want to start with talking about is kind of reinforcing how we approach the idea of openness. At Spark, our key focus is to support systems of research and education that are both open by default and equitable by design. Those values are our North Stars and central to our vision of what we need to continue to build during times like this, these kinds of chaotic times. I'll talk a little bit more about equity later, but I want to say something about how we're approaching openness first. At Spark, we view open as an enabling strategy, right? Not open for open's sake, but using open in order to create systems that democratize access to knowledge, make higher education more affordable to more people, accelerate discovery to improve people's lives. Openness is a tool to help set the conditions that are foundational to the kind of research and knowledge sharing system that we're aiming to build. So openness is critically important to us. And one of the actions that I think we need to be aware of taking is maybe sort of a non-action, right? We shouldn't back off at this moment in supporting the use of open as an enabling strategy. No matter what those pressures look like, it is something that is a critical tool in our arsenal. Okay, let's talk about other actions that are sort of more directly related to the pressures in those three buckets that I talked about. All of the pressures that I kind of enumerated present impetus for action and also new opportunities. As we consider, for example, the political pressures that are in front of us, it's absolutely unequivocally true that the kinds of mechanisms, right? The gold standard science, EO, the OMB, rulemaking, revision on grant making, they all have some massively bad components that have really, potentially negative consequences for our ecosystem writ large. But we really do have to be aware that tucked into these things in several places, there are things that represent unprecedented opportunities for us in our community. This is the first time, for example, that any administration on the presidential administration level has ever called directly for large-scale systemic change in how research communication is organized and funded. And that's happening with this OMB grant rulemaking process, along with the president's budget request process, and which is in play right now. This is the first time we have ever seen policymakers openly challenge the primacy of APCs, of article processing charges, and even questioning the appropriateness of paying them. And that's happening in multiple sources, right? Yes, again, in this OMB rulemaking process, in the presidential budget request, from the NIH director, issuing an open call for comments about, like, should we do something about these APCs, right? This is the first time, right, in the US that we have seen this. It is also the first time that in the congressional appropriations process that we're seeing language in a handful of bills saying, hey, public access, open access to research publicly funded research is a really good thing, and we need to continue to support it. But if we're not going to continue to go down this route of paying high APC or publisher costs, what should we be supporting instead? Shouldn't we be considering putting some money in for critical infrastructure to support the open communication of these results? This is giving us an unprecedented new opportunity to hit a massive reset button on the underlying rules of the road in research communication in the policy environment here in the US. But we have to be absolutely ready with clear policy asks, a clear set of asks, and an action plan for advocating for them. I think we as a community have to make sure we are articulating together what are the places that we want to change policy to ensure that research and knowledge sharing solutions and the policies that underpin them work for everyone, right? For example, we know APCs don't work for everyone. So we want to focus on the opportunity for new policies that focus on investing in critical infrastructure that supports the ability for, as we said, everyone everywhere to not only be able to access, but contribute to and benefit from sharing research. This means in the political realm and in the congressional language realm, language that advocates for money for repositories, of course, but also for shared open publishing platforms and for resourcing locally controlled knowledge production mechanisms. Along with a call for that money, we need policies that accompany that with a call for rewarding the use of that infrastructure commensurately, right? So we have two really big opportunities on our plate. One, hit the reset button for policy, and also really attacking that nexus with payments to commercial publishers going hand in hand with how prestige is conferred. With the economic pressures currently at play and the political reforms or changes, I hate the word reform in this environment, the political changes that we may see enacted, one of the things I think is pretty much inevitable is that we're going to see commercial publishers and APC-driven publishers turning up the heat on our university administrators to provide more money for payment of APCs. And I say that because, right, if this OMB rule does go through and it prohibits the use of, for example, direct research funds to pay APCs or publishing costs of any kinds, the publishers are not going to be able to go to libraries to make up the difference, right? Our budgets aren't going to increase. They have only one place to go, and that's upward in institutions to ask for additional money. That's not a great thing to have happen, right? I don't love this for our research administrators, but one of the outcomes that it will force research administrators, provosts, offices of sponsored research to consider why researchers are asking them to pay for these kinds of APCs for these journals, now that it's coming out of their own budgets, and ask the question, do we really want to keep paying publishers for this? And make no mistake, right? Researchers recognize they can communicate their articles through a variety of different channels. They ask for APCs to publish in journals in order to get the prestige that those journal names convey in the tenure, promotion, and hiring processes. This creates the opportunity for us to elevate the conversations that we have already worked so hard to catalyze on our campuses about reforming those processes. And more specifically for library publishers, it creates an opportunity. When university administrators have to ask themselves the question, do I want to dip into our institutional budget to pay for prestige? The answer is, and the answer is no. The next question they ask is, what do I want to, what can I do instead? And libraries who have publishing programs, diamond programs, university presses are uniquely positioned to raise your hands and say, publish with us, right? We become not add-ons or nice to have in this kind of a moment, but shovel-ready solutions for our institutions to deal with these pressures. And by the way, the next generation is getting much louder about supporting this kind of a move. I don't know whether you had the opportunity to see that in March, the MIT Graduate Student Council released a resolution on scientific publishing and libraries, really kind of directly going at this notion of paying publishers for prestige, right? In their resolution, they note really three main points. They refer to journals as hyper prestige journals, right? That create incentives that are misaligned with scientific and academic ideals, and distort scientific progress and graduate education. They also note that these same journals promote lucrative business models that don't pay for labor, that disrespect author rights, and that put unfair financial burdens on institutions, particularly libraries, whose budgets are not, who are being cut, not going up. And the resolution calls for action, right? The students call for the library to go ahead and end the contracts, the bundled contracts, the commercial big deals with these publishers, and instead for the library to work with them to identify open, equitable, and sustainable solutions, and to encourage publication in those outlets, and for MIT as an institution to reward those choices properly. So we have allies in the graduate students, postdocs, early career researchers who are, kind of much more willing than they've ever been to speak out and to vote with we don't want to do this. And if you don't want to do this, we don't want to do this. What can we do together? So it's a phenomenal opportunity for us all to engage and really re-engage with student leadership and also faculty senates in our advocacy for institutional support for open and equitable solutions like library-based, university-based publishing outlets. It's a win-win-win, right? It's good for students, it's good for science, it's good for scholarship, it fits right in with institutional goals, and probably most importantly, it's financially advantageous for the institution at this moment, right? These are opportunities that we really shouldn't let slip through our fingers. One other area that's really ripe for action, and as I mentioned earlier, is that publishers, particularly commercial publishers that have APC models, are facing financial pressures from threats to a critical supply source for the thing that they need to function, and that's articles, right? Less US investment in research is likely to result in significantly less research articles coming from the US. And collectively, the US and China are the top two net producers of research articles that commercial publishers count on. China recently issued a policy that rewards publication in Chinese journals over international journals. So there is already the beginning signs of a shift of where the articles from the largest producer is going, and it's a move away from some of these big commercial publishers. The top two net producers facing downward pressure starts to really, come home to roost for commercial publishers. At Spark, we recently released, I think just 2 weeks ago, a financial analysis of the 5 biggest commercial journal publishers. And we looked at what market analysts are saying about their current and future positions. And along with noting this pressure, they pointed to kind of a second pressure on commercial publishers, which is that those big commercial publishers now have to offer AI-assisted services and functionality. They need to adapt and incorporate AI into their workflows. They have not been able to invest in, creating their own AI, and it's simply beyond their ken, right? They are as reliant as any other businesses and organizations on the big tech companies like Google, Microsoft's AI, OpenAI, Anthropic, right, for the technology, which means they now have to pay a third party for tech that they can then adopt and adapt for use in their models. So they're starting to be squeezed, right? Their ability to make margins are squeezed from the top for paying for tech adaptation costs and with some pressure on content sources potentially drying up. And our recent analysis shows that while their current positions look okay to market analysts, analysts are crystal clear that they do not have confidence in these companies' ability to continue to grow over the medium and long term, which is what drives their stock value and their positionality in the market. This puts libraries in a much, this knowledge, right? It really puts libraries in a much different position during negotiations with publishers than we've been in the past. This is an excellent time, right? Having this kind of information and understanding the pressures that are on these publishers, right? We're under them, but they're under them too. It's a great time to reconsider the necessity and nature of our deals with commercial publishers. It's an excellent time to educate institutional leadership about the position that this puts the whole institution, not just the library in, right, to be beholden to these commercial players and to present them with better alternatives, right? To talk to them instead about investing in locally controlled, locally owned options. A huge opportunity for libraries as publishers, for university-based publishing initiatives on our campuses. In order for that to succeed, though, one other action has to be front and center on our library radar screens. It is critical that we have strategic buy-in and a plan in place to get strategic buy-in from institutional leadership for the kind of investment that we need and transferring it from investments in big deal subscription packages or read and publish agreements to our locally controlled outlets. We have a negotiations community of practice at Spark, and one of the number one lessons that we learned was libraries who have walked away from buying commercial packages. It's not an investment. That's a dumb word for me to be using. From paying for commercial packages and actually investing in local solutions. Those who have been able to successfully stay away and make those investments are those who created a strategic plan for reinvestment and got the buy-in from the institution up front. So just a really critical action that we can take. But again, unique opportunity for us to really push and make progress in this area. Okay, that's political and economic changes. And I do want to touch briefly on the tech changes because we're hearing so frequently from our libraries about those pressures, about thinking about our collections as potentially being commercial assets. And, I think we're all hearing from researchers, wanting open, but second guessing them. And right, I understand why you would be thinking like, well, maybe open except for greedy AI companies, to monetize my otherwise open article. The action that I think we need to take is almost a non-action here, and it mirrors, something I said earlier about openness. I think as difficult as it is, it's really important that as a community, we resist the urge to reflexively lock down or move to control access or reuse of our scholarly content. It's really tempting to think that we could just do it, temporarily to make ends meet, or make a little money and then we can reopen. But realistically, we need to understand that's not the way it works. Once, you gate something, reopening it it's not like an open sesame thing that happens overnight. It's really, really difficult. We do have empathy, as I said, for researchers who have that human reaction of ruh-roh, maybe not open for AI, and to think maybe we could just make an exception here. Maybe we need an opt-out. Maybe we need a carve-out, or just do this for this one exception. But we have to recognize that if we do either of those things, we're weakening the most beneficial aspects that open brings to the table to create the kind of research and knowledge sharing environment that we want. I strongly, strongly believe that compromising on open isn't the answer, right? That reflexive on-off switch, open-close switch, that you go to first when you see a pressure is not the place that we need to be focusing on interventions. We should instead be focusing on the downstream mechanisms that regulate and govern behaviors around reuse and things at the point of the kinds of reuses that we're concerned that, for example, companies might deploy on content. We really need to focus on those downstream mechanisms that strengthen community norms, best practices, regulation, or policy even where needed at that point of intervention, right? It's really just thinking about where the interventions are more appropriate rather than kind of reflexively saying, we'll start with open and closed and then we don't have to deal with it. That will shut off our ability to build the kind of system that we want. Which brings me to, the last point that I want to make and the action that I think we have to be really intentional about doing individually and together. And that is being crystal clear about what that future system of research communication, of knowledge sharing that we are working towards building actually looks like. Future perfect can be feels like a state of mind sometimes. But when we have opportunities like this to build and we're faced with critical decision points that are really high stakes, like the ones that I just described, if we don't have a clear vision for what we're building towards, the diffusion of our energy is just too big, and we do not get the kind of focused results that we need through our advocacy efforts. From my perspective and from Spark's perspective, we're pretty clear that kind of the system that we've been operating under is not working for us. And we need to move away from a commercial market-based system where knowledge, research outputs, scholarly outputs are treated as a commodity to one where they are shared explicitly as a public good. The system has to be open by default and equitable by design. We need a system where knowledge production and sharing are under community control and ideally ownership, and where the communities set the norms, best practices, and rules. That shift from a commercial commodification market to a public good market is the underpinning of this system, and I think we have to call it out for what it is and what we want. This does mean, and I said I would, when I talked about openness, open by default, that I would talk about equitable by design before closing. It matters, right? This idea of being intentional about ensuring that any solution that we're building, that any initiative, whether it's a library publishing program, whether it's a repository-based solution, whether it's a new business model, that whatever we're building is built with the community that it is designed to serve and not for it. And that includes taking into account the needs of the global community, because research and scholarship are global enterprises. We have to take those needs in from the inception of any initiative and not wait to address them later. We learned that lesson the hard way with gold open access and the rush to flip journals. We'll just get to open using APCs and transformative agreements. So we'll get, those who can afford to do it will do it, and we'll deal with, inequities later. We saw what happened, right? The beast takes over and we're faced with what we're faced with. Yes, building intentionally and building with rather than for takes longer and it's more work, but it is worth it in the long run, and it is the only way we're going to get to the system that we want to get to. So there are a lot of challenges in front of us. They are big. They are daunting. But I hope what I've been able to illustrate is that these pressures have already forced some things to crack, and that these cracks present us with opportunities to act and to break things open, to really create large-scale systemic changes towards this kind of a system for sharing knowledge. And that each and every one of us is positioned to contribute and is, in fact, already contributing to make this happen. It's really important to recognize in the face of all these pressures and all that's being challenged that our day-to-day work as librarians, as library publishers, as university press professionals, as open advocates, that our day-to-day work is an incredibly potent form of advocacy. One of the strongest contributions that we can make in this kind of an environment is just to come in every day and do the work according to our principles and our values. There's something like 875 days till the next presidential election. Well, there's not something like it. There's 875 because I have a little countdown going. And there's no guarantee that that's going to deliver substantive relief. But what I know is this. Every one of those 875 days is a chance to do something to build the future we want. And Spark's not going to waste one of those days. We so look forward to partnering with LPC and the university-based publishing community to keep moving forward on this. And I thank you for the time to talk with you today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas in the Q&A. Thank you so much.